You're listening to a 58 Ember production.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp podcast. It's me, Haley Rawl, your host. And if you are navigating a faith deconstruction too, or simply fascinated by faith deconstruction journeys, by religion generally and Mormonism specifically, then you are in the right place. I have missed you. Obviously, I've been releasing episodes as usual, but Bentley and I, my husband and I, just got back from a trip to France that was a little bit over a week, and I batched a couple episodes before we left. So I feel like I haven't caught up in real time. So I'm very excited to be sitting down today and doing some catching up and talking about a topic that I've been really wanting to talk about and trying to hold myself back for some time. We are talking about ketamine today. I have been doing ketamine therapy for a couple of months now. I've done 3 sessions and I have so many thoughts, so many feelings. I feel like this is a topic of interest in post-religious communities, as many of us are seeking healing and spirituality and sometimes these more alternative forms of medicine. And so that's what we're talking about today. I also, as of this current moment, have my Instagram account. The Girls Camp Instagram account is currently disabled, deactivated. And I'm bringing that up because it's been a tough couple of days. I keep trying to keep this into perspective. It's pretty annoying and it's really frustrating, but I'm trying to keep into perspective that there are worse things in the world than losing an Instagram account. But obviously, when you are a podcaster, and I kind of see this podcast, or I do see this podcast as a business as well, it is a huge blow to the podcast, to the business, to not have that Instagram account. And I'm feeling more hopeful as of the past few hours that I'm going to get the account back. But even just not having the account for the past few days, like I released an episode this past Wednesday, and just not being able to promote it and share reels and talk about what people are thinking and feeling and just connect. Like, that's the point of me doing this, is the connection. And I think I've even underestimated how much Instagram is like this connection hub. Long story short, I found out that my account was disabled while Bentley and I were in France. We were on starting the last day of our trip. It was a very panicky feeling, but it said it was temporarily suspended. So I had some hope that it would get reinstated within 48 hours because that's what it said. And they ended up deactivating it. And luckily, I was able to kind of just check out and enjoy our last day in France. But since getting home, have just been really trying to figure it out, email a bunch of people, Instagram support. I won't bore you with the details, but what I do want to say is today I shared on my personal account, just plain Haley on Instagram, and just said, please help. I've heard that if you know someone who works for Meta, that they can do like an internal whatever, they can submit something internally. And I am just feeling really seen and supported because people are sharing on their stories. I've been connected to a few people who work for Meta who are trying to help me out, and I just feel so much better feeling like I'm not trying to figure this out alone, and that there are people who care and don't think that it's a silly thing, and it just feels like a community supporting me when I really need it. It's hard to ask for help. I think that's kind of a common thing that humans don't really like to do. Like, asking for help, it just feels vulnerable, and you always think there's bigger things going on. And anyway, I asked for help and I'm getting help, and I'm so grateful. I am manifesting and hoping and praying, though I no longer pray, but praying in a very metaphorical sense. No, it wouldn't be metaphorical. You know what I'm saying, that by the time this episode is released on Wednesday, that my account is up and running. That is my hope. But if it's not, you can also follow me on TikTok, Haley Rawl. You can also follow me on my personal account, just plain Haley. I don't know why this happened. The reason that Instagram says that they disabled my account is because it went against community guidelines. And I've been doing hours and hours of research. And this just happens to people. Like people get their accounts just taken away randomly sometimes. So this could be random. It could be an algorithm, AI thing. I don't know. But I have a suspicion that I was probably reported by disgruntled Mormons. And it's just made the whole experience more emotional because I feel like, can we just not have an Instagram page where we talk about our Mormon experiences and we talk about them on our terms and the way that we want to? And I've tried so hard to maintain respect when it's necessary. And I've just tried really hard to be clear about what that space is. And it just pisses me the fuck off, to be completely frank, that people are coming to my page, which says this is a post-Mormon page, and likely reporting me, getting multiple people to report me, and then that it ultimately worked and my page got taken down. It just feels like a silencing, and it frustrates me and maddens me to no end. That's like me going on the myriad come follow me, which is like the church curriculum now, going onto the pages of creators who talk about that and like reporting them. And I probably could report them because I think a lot of things that the Mormon church teaches could very easily qualify as hate speech, for example. And I'm not going to do that because I'm more mature than that. And I understand that like that is not for me. So I'm just going to move along. And I'm just annoyed and sad that it worked, you know? And it didn't, I mean, yes, it worked. It's like you made my life a lot more stressful than it needed to be. I just got home from a trip and now I have to worry about this thing. It's just annoying that it worked because now there's this thing that I have to figure out. And again, I don't know. I don't know who reported me or if anyone reported me, but if it was what I suspect, which is people coming to my page to report me and get me to stop talking about Mormonism, well, guess what? I am not going to stop, and we are going to find a way to get the page back. And I just have a little bit of fire in my soul right now about the whole ordeal. I was thinking today too, so Bentley and I just got back from France, and we got so incredibly lucky because there was all that stuff going on with, I think it was a software, I wish I remembered the name, but a software went down that affected a lot of things, but it affected airlines because a lot of airlines relied on this software. And Delta, which is what we fly, we always fly Delta, was really severely impacted. Like people were stranded for days. They couldn't get home. They were with kids, like unaccompanied minors were stuck in airports. And it was just a whole mess. And this happened like right in the middle of our trip where it didn't affect us getting to France. And then we were able to get home without any delays or anything, which I was so shocked that it worked out that way. And I was thinking, this is so lucky. Like I could be stuck in France. I could be stuck at JFK Airport and have to find extra childcare for additional days for my kids and be missing work stuff and all these things. I was just like, I'm so grateful and glad that the timing was just really, really perfect, that we didn't get caught up in any of that. And then I was thinking it's also incredibly unlucky that my Instagram account got disabled. And I don't know. I think the reason I think about these things a lot is because I used to do a lot of meaning making out of things like that. Like, oh, it was meant to be that this happened. The Delta, breakdown, meltdown happened at just the perfect time that it didn't affect me. It's just nice, I guess, to be grateful for when things go well and to be like, I'm really glad it worked out that way. But then also when things don't go well or when you have a stroke of bad luck, just being like, that's a bummer. And this just happens to people. And there's no cosmic meaning or like creator pulling strings for some people and not for other people. And I've just been trying to focus, as the old adage says. Again, not totally sure what adage means, but I think it's close enough. This is like the AA mantra or whatever, where they say, God grant me now I'm going to have to look it up. Okay, it's the serenity prayer. It says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So minus the God part, I think that's a really good piece of advice and wisdom that I'm trying to be better at sitting in. I wanted to give a little recap of the France trip because some people were asking like what areas we went to. I'm going to actually do like type up a whole thing and share it on Instagram. I'll probably do that on my personal account in the meantime, just plain Haley. But I think I'll do just kind of like a little overview for fun at the end of this episode. So we're going to jump into the ketamine stuff and then talk about France for just a little bit, just in case that doesn't interest you, but we'll talk about that for a little bit at the end. Let's go down the K-hole together, shall we? The K-hole is what you call it, I think, when you're in the depths of a ketamine trip. And I don't think you always get there in every ketamine trip, but there's just a thing called the K-hole. So we're going to go down the K-hole, or I guess more specifically, my K-hole. You want to come down my K-hole? Maybe that'll be my title for this episode. Going down my K-hole. No, probably not. I probably shouldn't push the limits on things like that in light of getting disabled. I have been thinking about doing ketamine. I've talked about it on the podcast for a long time. And there came a point a couple months ago where I was just like, why am I still talking about this? I just want to do it. Oh, it was actually my birthday. It was my birthday. I had a weird existential beginning half of my birthday, and I was just like, what am I doing? Like, I just realized I'm still suffering with these same thought patterns and behaviors that I have been for a long time. And I'm aware enough to recognize them, but just like don't feel like I can get out of them. And I was struggling on my birthday, and I was like, you know what? The best birthday present I can give myself is I am going to make the ketamine thing happen. I've been feeling called to it. I'm just going to do it. I've been putting it off because mainly money. It's expensive, because I think I was really nervous. I was really nervous. So on my birthday, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to talk about exactly the route I went, like where I went in order to do the ketamine treatment. But I will say it has been guided. And I've been with one other person who's guided me through the experience, which I think has been really crucial for me. If you're looking to do ketamine, there's a lot of clinics popping up, especially in Utah. I know a lot of people have been going to clinics and sharing about it. So I'm sure a quick Google search, you could find a bunch of options for clinics. I know there's places. I was talking to a friend of mine who's doing ketamine treatment, and she actually had them come to her. So they like bring the treatment to you, and then someone guides you through it in your own house, which is really nice. I do know some clinics are a little bit more clinical than others, and I was really looking for something that felt more homey, a little bit less just clinical. I wanted a comfortable environment. And I also know that some clinics leave you alone. And I was really glad that I had someone with me. I think it would have been not nearly as helpful and also pretty scary without someone, but I know people do it alone and have no problem. Just something to consider if you're considering the treatment. What drew me to ketamine is I am on Prozac. So I was prescribed Prozac, which is an antidepressant, an SSRI, all the way back when I was going to BYU, which was 7-8 years ago. I finally got diagnosed with anxiety. My anxiety had gotten really, really bad. I actually ended up in the hospital because I thought I was having a heart attack. It was actually just basically a low-grade panic attack for like months at a time. I thought I had breathing problems. Like my body was really wigging out. And I got prescribed an SSRI, which I will preach and preach and preach some more of how life-changing SSRIs have been for me. My 10 milligrams of Prozac is just, I love it. I'm so grateful for it. My friend Ash Adams, who I'll talk about later too, because she's also doing ketamine right now, but she has been sharing just so many good things about SSRIs. I feel like there was a time when antidepressants were starting to be like way less stigmatized. And then I feel like things, maybe with the uptick in like holistic treatments, there's been more stigma creeping in that I've recognized, at least, against antidepressants. And I love the way Ash talks about it and shares about what they've done for her. Obviously, they're not, talk to your doctor and do what you want to do. But I just feel like if you are not on medication because of stigmas, I think Ash is a great resource and person to look to, because she has tried literally, I'm not exaggerating when I say literally, everything in the book to address her depression. And in her own words, she just said like it wasn't until getting on an antidepressant that she feels like she's just not suffering from depression. So there's my mini rant about antidepressants. I think I've been coasting for a while where I felt like my depression isn't super severe, my anxiety isn't super severe. I've been in and out of therapy, but I just sense that there's this deep inner stuff, which I was already talking about, not only of these patterns I was recognizing that I wanted to break through, but also just more like deep intentional healing that I've just kind of been avoiding or just like not having the time and energy to do. And I felt like ketamine, knowing myself and how I operate, I think therapy is great, but I think it's really slow. And I think because I'm an intellectualizer of my feelings, I'm actually really good at talking about my feelings. I love talking about my feelings. Surprise, surprise. I am an open book too. So it's not like I necessarily need someone just to talk about my feelings with. I struggle to get actually vulnerable, especially in a therapeutic setting. And so I've just heard ketamine can kind of fast track that. As far as like all the ins and outs of the science of it and stuff, I'll link a couple resources for you. The most helpful one I found is probably a podcast called Science Versus, and she talks about ketamine. The science is kind of, it's good-ish, I would say. Like there's definitely science that supports it, but it's also definitely not like an end-all, be-all, cure-all. And I appreciated that I had done some research and really internalized that fact before actually entering the treatments. So I wasn't expecting it just to fix everything, because I think I kind of was before doing that research. So like I said, I will link those resources if that intrigues you to learn more. I would suggest absolutely doing your own research and, obviously, blah, 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 disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a professional. So, do your own research. The thing that I had a hard time finding on the internet, which is what I really want to dig into today, which I think is kind of the most interesting part of this, because there's, I think, a universal experience for sure, but I also just think it's really fascinating to hear about people's experiences with psychedelic medicine, because it can be just very unique too. It was hard for me to find any information on what the sensation would actually be like what the actual trip while you're on ketamine feels like. So I want to talk a lot about that. And then I also am going to share just a lot of the insights and like the ways that I think it helped me, because spoiler alert, it's been really, really good for me. I think it definitely has maybe not even drawbacks, but I think there's things about it that, I think are worth considering, but I think ultimately it's been a huge net positive. So for my first time doing it, I was so nervous. I have this thing where I'm very afraid, and this is why it took me so long as an ex-Mormon to even like drink alcohol. And I'm still very, very careful and conservative about how much alcohol I drink. I've kind of crossed over this hump with weed, but I'm really nervous about being not in control of my body and my mind, which I think there's an element of that that's obviously really healthy. Like, yes, you don't want to be out of your faculties in a lot of scenarios, like especially as a parent and all those things. I think for me though, it probably goes back to the fact that my dad had drug addiction and alcoholism his whole life. It was even hard for me up until not that long ago, like maybe early marriage. Bentley would always be like, Haley, if something's hurting, like if you have a headache, take ibuprofen. And I feel like I was even resistant to taking like very over-the-counter ibuprofen pain pills because I just had a lot of associations with that, with my dad's addiction. And my dad, his addiction actually started due to prescribed medication. So I think knowing that, I've always just been wary, and also I just am a controlling person. Let me reframe that. I like being in control. I like being in control of how I'm perceived and how much I'm sharing. And so I think substances that kind of let your guard down have been really good for me, but also have been scary for me because that's a scary feeling for someone who likes to be very much in control. So obviously I talk about doing THC and how much I enjoy that. I drink alcohol now and again. I think that if you were a completely sober person, like if you had never done in your life ever been under the influence of like alcohol or any sort of mind-altering substance, I feel like ketamine would be pretty crazy. I actually really want my mom to do ketamine treatment, and I would be so curious what her experience with it would be. And I'll talk about the differences between how it feels to be high on THC versus ketamine. They're very different. I think that because of that difference, I was really nervous to do something new. And I know psychedelics are more intense. They're more dissociative. Ketamine especially is dissociative. I didn't know what to expect. There's also a possibility that you get nauseous, which I hate throwing up. So I was just like, I really don't want to get nauseous. I really don't want to throw up. I actually went into my experiences fasted. I've done them all in the morning, which is really nice, but I just don't eat in the morning and then do the medicine around like 10 a.m. And I've had a little bit of nausea, take your pick. I've had a little bit of that, but I think not eating before was really helpful for me. The first experience, I decided to take half a dose. I don't know. I'm not going to talk about like the exact amounts because I'm sure it just depends, talk to your provider about that. But my facilitator gave me an option. She said, we have a full dose. You can take half, you can take a quarter. And I felt like a half would be a good place to start. And I'm really glad I started with a half. That was like the perfect amount for my first experience. My first experience was I took the ketamine. You start to feel a little bit, you can't focus your eyes as well. You start feeling like, whoa, like something's happening. And I put on like the eye covers and laid down. I'm on a couch. I have a blanket. I'm in comfortable clothing. And as the medicine kicks in, you start just slowly dissociating from your body is probably the best way I can put it. And ultimately in that first experience, I ended up feeling like I was in a box. That sounds so scary. None of this it felt different. So there was elements of feeling afraid, but it was mostly really good and like comfortable. I felt like I was in a box that was really, really dark. Like it's pitch black. And I talked the whole time. I was talking to my facilitator, but I felt like my self, like who I actually am, was inside of this box, this really safe box. And my voice, the things I was saying, was outside of me. And I could, from inside that box, listen to what I was saying and hear it with distance and with perspective. And even as I would say things and be speaking through things, I was kind of able just to guide my own self. Like it was almost like my core self was doing therapy to the voice in my head. That first experience was really centered around the friendship breakup that I've experienced in the past 6 months or so. That's just haunted me and haunted me and haunted me. I just have had so much trouble and so much anger and sadness and triggeredness around that. Like I just can't get over it. And I had something happen kind of luckily, I guess, in hindsight, right before that first experience that was really triggering to me around that friendship breakup, where a group of people were like together and posting, and I was just feeling like so hurt and so haunted. And I decided to focus that first session on that. And I recapped this whole friendship. And it was like I got to see it as a movie, and I got to see who I was and who this friend was, and see what we meant to each other beyond just who we are, like almost as characters of like, oh, it's no wonder this is affecting me so deeply because this person means so many things to me. Like this person has almost served as a symbol of so many things throughout a big portion of my life because we have been friends since we were so young. And it gave me a lot of empathy and compassion for myself and for the hurt that I experienced, but it also gave me a lot of understanding for this person and seeing like what I could be to this person that could trigger them or that could cause them to behave certain ways. And it just left me feeling a lot more compassionate toward everyone involved in the situation, including myself. I also realized under the influence of ketamine, and I think this has been one of my biggest takeaways with ketamine generally, is that it's okay to be right. And this is when my facilitator came in, because as I kept recapping this story, I kept kind of trying to justify my hurt, defend myself of like why I felt so hurt and why that hurt maybe made me act certain ways or say certain things. And she kept just very gently reminding me like, it's okay. Like you don't have to prove that to anyone. You can sit in your own experience and know what you've experienced, and you're right about that. And even saying that now, I kind of like rebel a little bit against that of like, well, no, like I'm not always right. And of course I can't be right about everything. And of course I'm not perfect. And I had my part to play too. And of course, yeah, I wasn't perfect, but I also am really learning to say, but I am right in my hurt, and my perspective on this situation is valid. My hurt is valid, and to move from that place, which kind of ironically has actually made me much more compassionate and understanding to the person or the people who I feel like really harmed me. And I found that really interesting because I feel like I do this thing, and so much of this in my mind, so much of it goes back to the church where we never got to be right. It was always the Holy Ghost. It was always people in authority. It was always something outside of ourselves that was the right thing. And the most right we could be is just like interpreting that thing correctly, like receiving the message from the Holy Ghost or reading the right scripture at the right time. And just to be able to sit in that feeling of like, I'm right about this. And no one has to tell me that that's true. No one has to validate that for me. I can just be right in my own experience. It's something I'm still learning in a huge way, but it's been really, really helpful for me to feel that. And I think my fear in feeling like, no, I am right about this, is that then somehow I'll become like this egomaniacal narcissist who's like, I'm always right and I'm never wrong. But it's really not that, because I think if you can validate your own experience, you actually then have so much more capacity and capability to do that for other people. And when I'm trying so hard to defend and to justify, again, how I feel, I end up more so invalidating the other people around me too. And it's really complicated. Like this whole friendship breakup, I think, has just been so complicated for me because I want to just be able to say, like, I was wronged, I was hurt, what this person did was not okay. But I also then don't want to be like, well, I was perfect, because I wasn't. But you don't have to be perfect to feel wronged. And anyway, you can see the thought loops I go in around that, but I feel so much more at peace after talking through that under the influence of ketamine because of that distance I was able to have from myself. And that alone was just huge for me and has been really huge for me. I think that feeling, obviously, it wears off, right? So like even talking about it now, it's like I still have a little bit more of a trigger than obviously when I was under the influence of the medicine, but I can recall what it felt like and I can sort of bring myself back there in a way that I wasn't able to before. Sorry if you see me moving around on camera. Our AC is currently not working and I think it's like 82 degrees in our house. So if you see a sheen upon my brow, if you're watching on YouTube, that is why. The only other thing I'll say about that first experience is the scary part of ketamine, at least, and I've never done any other psychedelic, is the best way I can describe it is you feel like you're falling in your brain and there's like nowhere for your brain to land almost. And if you start fixating on that, it can feel really scary. This is why I was so glad to have a guide, because there were times when I would just sit in silence and be thinking, and then I would start to kind of like feel that falling feeling of like, wait, what was the thought I just had and what's even a thought, and just kind of losing sense of self in a more scary way. And then she would ask me a question and then I would respond and just be brought back to myself. And so I guess I would just say that first experience was not really scary besides that feeling. I actually feel like having experience with marijuana was so helpful for me, because I have been too high before with THC and I've learned to take a breath and know this passes. It's not permanent. I'm not stuck here. And I can just kind of let go and surrender. And I think that ketamine is also a really helpful medicine for learning that surrender, just on that level of like, I have to just like let my brain ride this wave, even if it's uncomfortable and new. And it feels good to do that, even though is uncomfortable and new. So that was my first experience. I did my second experience pretty soon after, and I took 3/4 of the dose, so a significant amount more. And this experience, I think, was going back to the K-hole and my K-hole. This was my K-hole experience. I went much deeper into the medicine, and it was much scarier at times because of how deep I went. When I went deeper, that first time I explained, like I felt dissociated from myself. This second time, it was more like I felt like I entered a different realm of being. And I was disconnected from myself in the same way as that first time, but my brain was like more part of this like expansive universe where I was seeing like shapes and colors, not to a crazy extent, but I was like, as I would say certain things, I would kind of visualize them, and there was music playing and I kind of visualized that. And the way that my facilitator explained ketamine, how like a ketamine trip can often go, is there's like not earth. Where does it start? Air, fire, water, earth, maybe? I don't know. Basically that you kind of drop into the medicine and things can feel kind of hard in the sense that you feel really ungrounded and you're like wrestling with maybe these bigger, deeper things that you haven't quite faced in that way. And then you slowly like work through that and come out of that, and then end at a place, I think you end at earth, where you feel like grounded and you can kind of like form takeaways. I'm really glad she told me that, because I think that also helped when I was feeling more in the murkiness of that trip. I knew that it was to be expected and that I was going to come out of it, like work through it. That experience, there was more sitting and just like I held my facilitator's hand, and there was more like sitting and thinking, though I did still talk quite a bit. Oh, the thing I wanted to say about my first experience too, my takeaway from that first experience was ultimately I got what I feel like was minimum 6 months of therapy, maybe even up to a year of therapy. I got that many insights and that much healing in one session of doing ketamine, which is like huge. This is why I would say you can justify the price of the medicine, because even though it is expensive, and just for like a general whatever, I paid $100 an hour, and then the medicine itself I think was like $30 or something. So my experiences have been between like 2 and 3 hours. So you're paying a good amount of money, but you really are getting a lot of bang for your buck. At least I have, because it feels like very fast-tracked therapy. And it's fast-tracked because your inhibitions are down, because you have that dissociation. And I think the biggest reason it's a therapy fast track is because psychedelics, I don't know all the science of this, but as I've had it explained to me, your brain is like a ski resort where there's paths that skiers have gone down, which is your thoughts, again and again and again and again. And there's these really deep grooves in your brain of when something happens, you think a certain thing about it. And that's the path. And it's the easiest path to take because your brain has thought that way for a really long time. Psychedelics create neuroplasticity, which is like a fresh sheet of snow over the ski resort, so that your brain can start taking more easily new paths. Because when there's snow over top, you have some more flexibility to think about things in a different way and to like reimagine things. And so I would say those are the reasons why it felt like therapy, but on steroids. The second experience, I still had some of that. I feel like my second experience was more of what I feel like people talk about when they refer to an ego death. I don't know if that's even a thing with ketamine. I've only heard that really talked about with mushrooms. But basically, I felt like I lost my entire sense of self. Like I was laying on the couch and I was like, who am I and what even is a person? I would like try and think about like, I got dropped off here by my husband. Like, what's a husband and a family? And we just like get in cars and drive places. And it was very like, what is reality? It very much distanced me from reality. And that's really disorienting and even frightening. But as I came back to myself, there was a lot of learning in that space too. But then as I came back to myself, I just found myself being like, oh, I am not all these things that I put so much weight on. I'm not my body. I'm not my name. I'm not where I live. I'm not what I do. I'm not even who I'm married to or the kids that I have. I'm ultimately this soul, this like inner something that's actually really disconnected from all of that. And all of that is kind of irrelevant to the core of who I am. But coming back to all those pieces of me, it's helpful because I can have a healthy relationship with those layers of my identity. But also I found myself being so much more grateful for things that I used to kind of resent. I don't know, like a body is a good example where, you know, it's very easy to critique your own body or to be bothered by things that come up with your body, like having to cook yourself meals and having to like exercise and sleep and whatever. And after being so ungrounded and so outside of my body, I actually feel much more at peace and like grateful for the opportunity to just like be in a body. And same goes, like I think one of the biggest things that ketamine has helped me with along those lines is motherhood. All of these things about motherhood that feel laborious or tedious or tiring or annoying or inconvenient, they've felt less so in the wake of doing ketamine because I've been able to more see them as like, oh, I'm actually grateful. Like I would rather be grounded and like connected to these things, even though that does come with massive inconveniences, than I would be like alone on an island as just a floating like consciousness. Like it feels good to be in a body and to be in a family and to be in a community. And it's really interesting. It's kind of like this dual thing because it makes you appreciative of all those layers of reality that can be frustrating, but it also has made me less afraid of like death. That was another big thing I was hoping to work through, and I've started to, of like, ultimately, I think when I die, like all of those things are gone and all of those elements of reality are gone, but there's still like something very much persistent and eternal. I cannot use the word eternal. That is way too triggering in a Mormon context. But there's something lasting about me that I can see lasting beyond death, because death strips you of all of those things, even your body. It's just like a soul thing, I guess. Like ultimately, I'm saying it in all these maybe complicated ways, but it just feels like, oh, I feel like I do have this soul that is really pure and really good. And that was the outcome of my second experience. My third experience, I actually took a half and then a half of a quarter because I was like, I don't know if I can go all the way there again. And I would say it was more similar to my first experience. It was much more mild, and I didn't get quite as like distant from myself. But that one felt really, really hopeful. And I think the best thing about my third experience was after, as I was like coming out of the medicine, I was just like talking. That one I talked about a bunch of things. Like I've talked a lot about my marriage, friendships, like I've said, motherhood. I just love thinking about my children while doing ketamine. Like I've just felt so connected to them, more so than ever after doing it and while doing it, and just seeing them and appreciating them as like teachers to me, and just how much children show us a way of life that's playful and connected and spontaneous in a way that is just so beautiful, that I'm so grateful for. And anyway, coming out of that third experience, my facilitator was like, I'm blown away by how differently you are speaking about yourself than from the first time we did ketamine, which was like a month at that point. And that was just like the most special thing to hear and to realize like, oh, I'm like gaining compassion for myself, and like what more could I hope for? And it felt really validating to hear. And I think I wouldn't have recognized that myself, because it's difficult to see that when you're in the midst of it, when you're doing it. But yeah, when she said that, I was just like, oh, you're right. I'm allowing myself to be more hopeful because I'm being more compassionate to myself in all areas of my life, at that soul level, on all those layers of identity as a mom and as a wife. And that was kind of like, I would say, maybe the theme of my third experience. Okay, I'm going to answer a few questions and then maybe share a few more insights. I was actually kind of worried I wouldn't have enough to talk about with ketamine, but I got plenty to talk about because there's so much more I could share. So I'm going to answer some questions, maybe do a few more insights that I had. Okay, someone said, is a ketamine high similar to a weed high in terms of physical feeling? Yes and no. I think it's similar in the sense that weed makes me feel very like heavy, and my body feels heavy and calm. It's calming. It's a little bit of a sedating feeling, and ketamine is that way. Ketamine is definitely much more intense and much more dissociative, where you feel, which weed can be that way too, I think, at least for me, but it's like to a whole different level. Like I said, I do think having experience with weed, though, was really useful for me in being able to kind of like navigate the medicine. My facilitator talked about it that way too, where she was like, you kind of learn what it feels like and how to navigate it. And I think weed helped me do that sooner. Someone said, did you take antidepressants before doing ketamine treatment? What led to it? So I already kind of talked about that, but I did want to say that one really good thing about ketamine, which I think is different from mushrooms, is that you can stay on your antidepressants. And in fact, there's some research that shows that ketamine can be more effective long-term if you are taking antidepressants. And I loved hearing that because I did not want to have to go off Prozac, and I just didn't want to worry about that. So I've been on my antidepressants the whole time, and it does not affect, or has not for me, affected the efficacy of the treatment, which is a huge bonus for my SSRI girlies and guys and theys. Someone said, I don't fully understand how it helps depression. Is it because of what you experienced during the ketamine trip? Yes, this is a good question. I think it is because of all those fast tracking elements that I said of like being able to make breakthroughs and also rewire your brain. There's also just chemicals in the medicine that I don't think they fully understand why they do this, but it also just gives you like good chemicals in the brain. Those don't last forever. So, I think it's maybe like 3 to 5 days or something you have that, but you do just get like good chemicals in your brain that can make you happier. In all the research I did around ketamine, one of the drawbacks is that a lot of people have found that it's not as lasting as you would think. Like there's a lot of people who feel a lot better in the immediate wake of ketamine, but then go back to depression, anxiety, whatever. I think to me, that would just come down to integration in a big way. I was probably helped a lot from that because of being on antidepressants. I mean, yeah, it's just definitely not, you can't just like take ketamine and it's going to fix things. You very much have to integrate what you've learned and, just like keep doing treatments. There's different recommendations on how many treatments to do and in what amount of time. It's been difficult for me scheduling wise. So I did 2 in close succession, had a pretty long break until the 3rd, and I'm now having a break before I want to do 3 more. A lot of people say do 6 within 6 weeks. Some people say do 6 within 3 weeks. So there's multiple different ways you can do it. But yeah, I think the way that it helps depression is from all those different angles. One quote I forgot to read that I think also helps sum up kind of a mental shift that ketamine has really helped me make. And I think the other thing that I actually would say about the depression thing is there's something about psychedelics, and I feel this way with weed too, where it's a felt experience in the body as opposed to just a experience of the brain. So when you're having a realization, it's so much more lasting because you feel it as opposed to just like thinking it and like rationally understanding it. And I think that also is what helps you bring yourself back to those realizations, is because you remember what it felt like as opposed to just like, oh, I realized this thing in therapy. You can like almost go back to that place of feeling. But I've been thinking a lot about this quote. I heard this long ago, but I think I refound it the other day and I was like, oh, this like really helps sum up a lot of this. It's by Ram Dass. Should have looked up who that person is. Some spiritual teacher, I think. They say, you can do it like it's a great weight on you, or you can do it like it's part of the dance. I've been trying to remember that in just the things you got to do every day, the things you have to do to make money and take care of yourself and your family if you're part of a family, and just these things that I think it's easy to resent as a human, and just trying to be like, you know what? I get to be human. And I get to be here right now, and I get to take care of myself and have a career and be a mom. And that's part of the dance. And the dance is not always the most fun. It's not always, frolicking around France like I just got to, which I'm so glad I did. I think those moments are really important too. But so much of life is just like life, the mundane stuff. And I am a person whose default is a great weight on you, that life is a great weight on you. And I want to be more of a part of the dance person. And ketamine has definitely helped me. The last thing I'll say, the last big insight I have, this is a little bit connected to the feeling of being right that I was talking about, of like you're allowed to be right. But also I think I really internalized I'm good and you're good. And we're all good. We are not born bad or wrong. We are actually good. And that's okay. You get to acknowledge I am good at my core. We can't hate ourselves into being good people. And same as the rightness thing, like same as me always trying to convince myself I'm wrong. I think I spend a lot of time trying to convince myself like, well, I'm not that good actually. Ketamine just kind of made that feel silly. Like, of course you're good. Everyone's good. Ultimately, like deep down, we are made of goodness. And the more we can connect to that in ourselves, the better we will feel and our communities and our families will be. And I think you see that in a huge way in Mormonism, where there's a lot of talk about the natural man is an enemy to God, and a lot of messaging that at our core we're not good and we needed someone to come and save us from our evilness that's so inherent, that we're going to be bad no matter what. And I think you see the fruits of that in how you feel as a Mormon and how the community operates and its lack of inclusivity. Like, those things have really profound effects, not just on a personal level, but through all the systems that be. And it's been really nice to remind myself that I'm good, and that reminding myself I'm good is a good thing. And it's not going to put me in a bad place. What will put me in a bad place is trying to always convince myself that I'm not good. This one is just a random tidbit, but I don't think would have actually made this connection, but my friend Ash that I was talking about earlier, she said this because she's done ketamine treatment and she shared a lot about it. That's also so good. Go look at her page. It's Ashy Adams, and she has, or did she change it? She might have changed it to Powers. I'll link it in the show notes, but she was talking about ketamine and she said this and I was like, oh my God, I felt that too. I love the sun. And I used to get kind of like a sensory overload. I would get really hot really easily. I hated being sweaty. Like, laying out by the pool was like actually kind of a sensory nightmare because of the sweatiness, and just like I just got too hot and it almost felt like overstimulating. And I love the sun. I want to sit in the sun all day and soak it up like a sponge. And I also feel like it's just helped generally with like any weird sensory stuff I've had. I don't have significant sensory issues, but I just have like weird things around like being wet and like dripping I really hate, and like the sun like I was talking about. And I feel like ketamine's actually helped a ton with that, which is just kind of random, but an interesting tidbit. Okay. That's all I'm going to say on ketamine for now. If you have any follow-up questions, I'll put a box on Instagram, hopefully Girls Camp Podcast, but maybe just my personal account, and can answer some more things on my story too, if there's any additional questions. But ultimately, so glad and so grateful I've had the opportunity to do it. Like I said, I know it's not financially viable for everyone, which sucks. I wish it was covered by insurance, but if it is a possibility for you, I personally would strongly recommend it. Let's talk briefly about France, because it was so great. It was so nice. I did kind of endless amounts of research about the south of France. We ended up choosing the south of France because Bentley, we are so fortunate that for his job, he travels a lot, which means that he has tons of points, Sky Miles. We use Delta. And he'd been saving up points for a really long time. And we had been talking about going to Europe. And he was like, I have enough points, because there was this deal to Nice, France, which is in the south of France. And he's like, should we do it? So we ended up doing it. And we're also very, very lucky to have my mom, who watched the girls, my sister watched the girls for part of the time. There's just a lot of factors that are really lucky that I want to acknowledge. It's really fortunate to be able to travel, especially at this phase of our life where we have kids. Just to have such good childcare in the family is just really nice. Anyway, we had Sky Miles to go to Nice, France, and I just did lots of research on like the best places around Nice and in the south of France, and I think it really paid off. I'm like quite proud, if you can't tell, of our itinerary, just because, you know, sometimes you go somewhere and it's just like, it's hard to know. It's hard to know what's a tourist trap and what's a hidden gem and what's worth the drive and what's not worth the drive. And I just feel like almost everything we did and place we went, we were like, this was perfect. We were here for just the right amount of time. Like, it just felt really awesome. And I also just think we got lucky. Like, we've been on trips before. We went to Hawaii. So it was like 4 years ago, and we were there for 5 days. This was before kids, and I'm not kidding. It rained hard every single day, which is rare in Hawaii. It rains a lot in Hawaii, but for it to be raining all day, every day is rare. And it was just like the kind of thing where we were like going to the beaches, just like in a torrential downpour, like trying to swim. And finally on like the third day, we were both trying to be like, this is fine. We were like, this is just like really shitty timing. And we're so grateful we can go to Hawaii, but also like it fully just rained the entire trip. So traveling is just very hit or miss that way. And this just felt like lucky with weather, just like everything worked out really nicely, which I was so glad about. And it was really good time to connect with Bentley. We haven't traveled alone since having the girls, I don't think. We've gone on like some trips with other couples and stuff, but it just felt like really important time that I was really glad to have. As far as the places we went, we stayed most of our time on the coast of the south of France. So Nice is kind of like the main city, and then there's a bunch of cities along that coast, along the Mediterranean, the French Riviera. The first place we stayed was called, I can't say it. Bentley and I were joking the whole trip, like this was the hardest French word to say. Boulogne-sur-Mer, I think. It's a little bit outside of Nice, which I was really glad we stayed a little bit outside of Nice. It's a smaller city. It's still coastal, but it just felt more charming and like easier. A lot of days we just like went to brunch like right outside of our apartment, and parking was easier. And we found just an Airbnb there, and we really loved staying there. And then from there, we were able to like check out Nice for part of the time. We went to a really cool beach like an hour away down south in the Cannes area. We went to a city called Antibes. And then we went a couple hours inland to a place called Aix-en-Provence. I'm so sorry that I did that I pronounced it that way. You know how it is when you're like saying words like that? It's like Aix-en-Provence. It's like, how French do I do this? Anyway, that was cool because it was different from the coastal places. And we were there okay. I keep getting interrupted. The twins are, if you can hear that, that's my mod upstairs. They will wake up from their naps and they like love to play, but lately a lot of their playing has been screaming at the top of their lungs. So that's Mod screaming. So let's put a pin in the travel log. I have to say one other thing, which I was like wanting to talk about going to France, and I was like remembering this thing. I don't know if any of you Mormons remember this, where during fast and testimony meeting, people would get up on fast and testimony meeting, which is the once a month, whoever can go up to the pulpit and like share their testimony can, and they would just like talk about their trip. And it got to be such a problem that there was like this whole movement of like testimony should not be a travel log. Do any of you remember that? I don't know. Random. Anyway, I'm going to put a pin in that travel log. I'll share more just on my stories and stuff. But thanks for listening to me today. It's really nice to share insights, to talk about that ketamine treatment. I've been excited to recap it, and I hope it was helpful and or interesting. And thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting with like getting my account back and all of that. I'm just really grateful, and I love you so much. Like, subscribe, follow, hopefully at Girls Camp Podcast on Instagram. If not, just plain Haley on YouTube, Girls Camp Podcast on TikTok, Haley Rawl. Ratings, reviews, they mean the world to me. Comments, shares, all the things. I love you. Thanks again. Bye.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
This has been a 58 Ember production. For more shows, please visit the 58 Ember channel, 58ember.com, or find us at 58 Ember Media on socials.